Wow.
You know
And you
what?
even warned him.
Well, now I want to clarify a couple things on that. Did you warn the sales exec? Did he have an opportunity to talk to his VP or whoever the exec sponsor was in advance?
He had an opportunity. It didn't occur. And
Jeez.
he tried in real time to say, Dion and I spoke about it. We're in an agreement. And she said, unless the agreement is he's paying. So you can see it just spiraling out of control
Hmm.
and then becomes a dumpster fire that everyone's just throwing gasoline on. It was, again, we recognized the risk. We thought we mitigated it, but alignment about that. And again, the SOW to fix the issue was probably 20 grand.
Wow.
Let me guess, when you brought in an e-commerce provider on the wider scale, you replaced the smaller one.
Absolutely.
I saw that coming.
You know what? This gets back to something that's very, very challenging to do in the sales world. When you go into an account, well, I guess two things that can come out in my head on this. When you have an issue, address it straight away, talk about it, and say, "Well, let's work on it together." Right? Take the senior or not senior, take the high road type thing on that. Let's dig into it first. But secondarily, you never want to bring a ding dong executive into an account. And I've had it happen where you're working, you've got a good mojo going, you're doing your thing, and then a new exec comes in and says, "Hey, I want to meet with so and so or whatever," and you never work with he or she. And then you find out in that meeting, okay, that's the last one you're going to bring them into. And then you got to have air cover internally to not bring them back in and such. But it's unfortunate that this person's sales exec or whomever that executive was took that approach because, as my wife often tells me, she's like, "Nate, it's not what you say, it's how you say it." In that case, it was kind of both, right? What she said, and then also what I guess the delivery of it, which was, "Nope, we're not doing it." And 20 grand killing 12 million in business. That's a big mess.
Yeah, and again, it's an example, but at a smaller scale, it happens all the time. If
Yep.
for the 20 grand, that should have been them coming to me saying, "Look, we're going to fix it because that's what we do." But if it ends up being you, I'm going to look for some payment. I would have been fine. I'm the one who perceived the potential of it derailing the conversation, initiated it. It just seems like, so go to the airport at 2 a.m. to pick up a part. That's problem solving, right? And did he get compensated over time for that? Of course he did. And if that company had been smart enough to say, how big is this? 20 grand? We could eat that. We spent that much to fly in for this meeting.
Yeah.
Doesn't it's so they just don't. I don't know. I think you said it well, which is, there's a lot of pressure put on sellers to perform, and the better ones are somewhat of a umbrella for their clients and prospects, that they don't let that stuff get to them
Yeah.
because they field it. And that's true before the deal, it's true after the deal. I've dealt with some incredibly complex, confused organizations, but if the rep or the seller helps hide the complexity, I know it's there, but they're helping orchestrate and hide that complexity. I just feel so much better about the relationship.
Well,
Yeah.
and yeah, and thinking about that, I mean, like you said, you're the one who helped preempt the objection. The salesperson should have been doing that. I mean, you literally held their hand and they still screwed it up. That's embarrassing.
And the exec that, maybe she could pound her chest, she got a 20 grand SOW maybe, and left without a $10 million deal. It is an extreme case, obviously, but there are smaller circumstances like that occurring all the time where it's that vendor versus partner. Help me fix the problem. Then sit down. I'll be reasonable. You're reasonable. We'll work it out. And I think that comes with the relationship part of both selling and buying. And you have to have confidence, trust, and somewhat of a relationship where you feel like you're not dealing with a used car salesman.
Yeah. It reminds me of a term that I learned in the mid 90s. Second company I worked for out of college, and the guy I worked with, it was a very transactional thing, like the renewal contract renewals. I still remember to this day, the contract renewal for 12 months was $468. That's how small it was. So it was a high volume. Anyway, this guy worked with Dave Aikman. He's like, I was working on something and it just wasn't happening. He's like, come on, man, delayed gratification. And when you talked about that person who went to the airport at 2 a.m., that's a delayed gratification thing, right? He's in the middle of the night going to get something to deliver it somewhere that isn't. It's just, frankly, it's not his job, right? But he's going above and beyond to fix your problem. And this many years later, you still remember it, right?
Yep.
And that's sometimes you have to do that. I remember one job I had, the VP's like, hey, we have people that do that, and whatever it was. And I'm like, I said, yeah, I do. I said, but if I do it, it gets done, right? And sometimes you have to balance that, right? 'Cause especially when you're in sales, if it's a little minor thing you can help push through, do it, right? Don't rely on somebody, because just because it's urgent for you as a sales exec, it ain't urgent for everybody else, right? And you're not sure if that whatever tactical thing needs to be done actually will get done. So if you can kind of manage it, and the other thing it does subtly, it takes a little bit of the workload off that person, and they remember that, right? Because everyone's like, hey, do this for me, right? And when you do that, it's people remember it, right?
They do. Absolutely. And it is all part of that relationship you can build with people on both sides of the desk. And again, the delayed gratification, I love that, because it really is about a long-term relationship. Depending on what your product is or what your company is, many of these relationships last for years. Ours, yours, and mine, they lasted years in companies, right? So those are the ones that make it easier to trust and to listen and to appreciate and understand and work through any issue that comes about.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. So was there an experience you had when you were on the sales side that was kind of similar to that $20,000 contract that blew up the $10 million deal? Was there anything that you saw in the time you were on the sell side that was, I don't want to say similar, but something that you saw a train wreck happening, and then you saw the train wreck?
Yeah, there's a couple scenarios. Deals come in either batches or not at all, but they never come smoothly, right? So I had a woman who I had a working relationship with at a previous organization I worked at. She ran procurement for the company I worked with. She left. She went somewhere else. I reached out, said, look, love to engage, see if we can, work together, see if we can help you. Nothing, right, for a period of time. Then the phone rings. She comes over and says, look, I got a great opportunity. Want you to help. We want to fast track a deal. And, my role was advisor, not seller. So the seller was in the throes of another very large deal for them and took up a lot of their time. Low rolled the heck out of her deal.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, this is my relationship. And I'm poking and prodding and, hey, I'm working on this. I'm getting heat from leadership. I got to get this deal. And I'm just like, oh my God. And it was one of those ones where it was a good deal, good foot in the door, and it had the opportunity to be very large. But it was a land and expand. It wasn't we're going to go in with a massive deal. It was embarrassing. I felt, I literally reached out to the woman and said, I'm sorry, I kind of oversold what we were able to get to you. And I actually went up the chain and said, maybe we can get him some help. Maybe we can, nothing. So we lost that deal because we slow rolled it. And it wasn't that they went with someone else. They just lost confidence in our ability to deliver. Because if you can't deliver during a sales cycle, you're sure is not going to be able to deliver when I need you in the role of delivery. That was one that certainly stands out in my mind. The other is the seller, different deal, obviously. The seller quoted the wrong, and it was too low, and they were interested because it was a great price, and his leadership told him to unwind that. So he came to me and said, what do you think I should do? I said, you kind of made a commitment. It was in writing. It wasn't a formal offer, but it was in writing. I said, if I was on his side and you told me you were going to significantly change the pricing you had offered me, I would question your integrity, and I'm not sure I would do the deal. So he tried again, and they're like, well, his role isn't really pricing. He shouldn't have been involved in that. I'm like, yeah, that's true. I wasn't. I was just giving you the anticipated response. There was a bit of a heavy hand. The deal got done, but I'm pretty sure that'll be the last deal that person ever does with that organization. So I think one of the lessons for me out of that was if you are unsure, then you need friends, right? And this was a relatively new person who was somewhat left to the wolves and had to figure it out themselves. And in the first one, where if you need help, raise your hand, right? When you fail, and I come to you, and this I learned from too many years in the trenches. If I challenge you and you give me a reason why you fail, those are excuses. If you raise your hand while you're struggling, you're handling that problem, and it's on me to give you the help you need to be successful. So those are things that I think are incredibly important for people to realize is if you're juggling balls and you don't know which one's most important, randomly one's going to drop, and it's
Right.
infrequently the one you want to drop. So even I'm working on these 5 deals, I can't do them all at once. Can you help me prioritize? There's lots of dialogue you can have to help alleviate or minimize the impact of those particular challenges. And I think people are pushed or self-conscious about asking for help, but I think you really need to ask for help if you feel the outcome is at risk.
Yeah, and in those situations too, you're better off, in some cases, brutal honesty, right? Not in some, in all cases. I mean, brutally honest about what happened. Like, and maybe it was too late for that person. They already put it out there. The price is what the price is. But internally, raise a flag and say, "Hey, I need help with this," right? Which in some cases, every company's busy, right? And everyone is busy. Um, it's an unfortunate situation, especially when it's a newer sales exec that's in that role, because they also look at it. Because I've been to a new sales exec multiple times, like, oh, they're going to look at me like I don't know what I'm doing, right? So check your ego is the point, because you'd rather measure twice, cut once type thing. In that scenario, whoever this person was, they cut and they didn't really measure the first time, right?
Right.
But it reminds me of what I told you when you were talking about going to the old shop, and you're like, "What do you think?" I said, "Well, you're going to see how the sausage is made, right? Sausage is great when it's done. You smoke it, it's all tasty. But man, making that sausage, it ain't pretty. I've done it. You got to put bits and whatever in the grinder. Package it. It's messy, but it all works out in the end, right?"
Yeah.
It, it, it
Oh,
does.
go ahead. Sorry, Dan.
Oh, no, go ahead, Rob.
No, you first.
Yeah, the challenge of some of that sausage is it can be interesting, it can be fun. We touched earlier a little bit about the networking piece. I loved that part of switching sides. When I was a CIO, I was pretty crappy at networking, right? I never found the right amount of time for it. And I was kind of heads down focused, which I would change today if I could. And flipping sides of the desk gave me that opportunity to reach back out to people and to talk to them. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. It wasn't a sales call, and this is where I got some of the poll commentary from. If I reached out to someone who I knew and I was like, let's just catch up, right? I just give me 20 minutes and we'll just find out where you're at, where I'm at. And they would describe where they're at. I would describe where I'm at. And sometimes they would say, hey, I think we should look at you for this, right? That's an opportunity. And those were great. The benefit that I got from that role though was reconnecting with people I hadn't spoken to in 25, 30 years. And, I followed them. I see them on LinkedIn, where they're at, what they're doing, et cetera. Or we talk to somebody who is a mutual contact, catch up on them. But it really is just great. Those working relationships, I think when you're in the throes of trying to accomplish business, don't mean as much as they should. And taking the time to kind of memorialize and enjoy those relationships, sending them a congratulatory note because they accomplished something or whatever. All of those things are just incredibly powerful. And I have not left one of those conversations where I was catching up with somebody where I didn't come away with some, nugget of learning or interesting fact or something I could use to continue growth.
So I want to go back to the pricing, the mispricing scenario for a second. Recognizing that for salespeople, a lot of their fear from a negotiation standpoint is whatever price that gets set as a baseline on the way in is the one that all the future negotiations are based on. And if that was based on an unprofitable price, then you're basically in a really bad spot unless you handle it appropriately. So my question to you from a buyer perspective is what would have really impressed you if that rep had come to you and said, here's the deal. And then what would he or she have said that would have made that element of it go away so that, year two is going to be mutually beneficial?
It's a great question, Rob, and I think I've thought about that, and to me, that's when you put electronic aside, right? There's a when can we meet? When can we have lunch or coffee or whatever? And then you explain transparently the pickle you put yourself in, right? And I guarantee if you do it that way, that person will help you come up with a creative way to get out of both of your challenges. And I think that's how I would have respected that differently than I did if I were on the buyer side. If that person had knocked on my door and said, "Look, I got a problem. Can we spend a few minutes and maybe we can work through this?" I would have been a participant in the solution instead of I used to use the term poop pointer, right? I'm not pointing at your bad stuff. I'm helping you clean it up or fix it. So to me, that's the way you address those problems. And we talked about this concept of partner versus supplier or vendor. And I said it's reciprocal, right? If you're transparent and you have a problem, we'll work through it. I used to tell people all the time, you it, nobody picks on somebody who's fallen down, right? But when someone would answer a question and I knew they were lying or they were trying to get out of the answer, I then have this character flaw where I would take it as sport to poke them with their lie until I had satisfied my character flaw. The point is, when someone admits they have a problem, people become helpers instead of critics. And I think that goes a long way. Nobody is going to pick on you if you raise your hand and say, I have a challenge. Can we work together to solve this?
Yeah, we've all screwed up. It's a question of have we owned up to it?
Right, right.
Yeah, that's a great. I love that perspective. I knew I needed to ask you that because I knew you'd have a thoughtful answer. So thank you for that.
Dion, one other thing that I was curious about is, you've had a long career, a lot of different companies you worked with. Is there anything you would tell your younger self, like coming out of school, 22 years old, whatever? Anything what would you tell yourself that, hey, it's going to be okay, look at things differently or whatever? And then kind of secondarily along those same lines, is there anything you'd change with your career, as far as if you could go back, what you know now, or if you knew then what you know now, what would you do differently, if anything?
Well, the going back in time. So I took probably my first computer class in I took one in high school, but I found my passion for technology in college. Prior to that, I was not an excellent student. I was a underachiever. And I was the guy in the library the week before finals that everyone turned and looked at because he was opening the book for the very first time. And you know how the binding glue makes that loud crack the first time the book's open? The entire library would just turn and look at me and go, "Oh my God." So, but once I found the passion in technology, it changed everything for me. So my point is, I would ask myself to try a little bit harder prior to that and actually maybe bring the books home once in a while and open them before finals. And so for me, it was really just a better balance. And it dovetails well, Nate, with career wise, I was probably the opposite, right? I was, you know, running a million miles an hour, trying to get everything done. There may have been debris in my wake that I didn't care enough about. Creating a balance between the very younger me that didn't try enough and the, early career me that probably tried too hard, and creating a better balance of it'll be there tomorrow. The problems will still be there. Your team is your best ally, and leveraging them and benefiting them throughout, and maybe not setting an expectation that was fair to me because I set the same expectation for myself, but may not have been perceived as fair to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you touched on something too, which was passion, right? And a lot of times people don't find a passion, so to speak, in their career. When you're passionate about something, people can tell, right? And they can also tell when you're going through the motions because you just don't have. And years ago, I read back when we had actual cassette tapes. I'd be in the car all the time and I'd listen to different motivational speakers. And one of them was, I think it was Harvey McKay, who owned McKay Envelope in Minnesota. And he said he'd interview people, why do you want to work at McKay Envelope? And one of the salespeople he interviewed was like, I love envelopes. And the guy's like, nobody loves envelopes. I own the company. I don't love envelopes, right? It's just kind of funny. But point being, when you find something you're passionate about, I will say this, the jobs that I had where I was passionate about it and I really loved the product and the service, when we worked together, I absolutely loved the service I was selling. And then there were solutions and software products that maybe weren't so great. Deep down in your gut, you don't love them. Those are much harder to sell. But like you said, when you find your passion for something, I mean, you have a great career, over the years as the CIO head of technology for companies, right? And that passion for tech, obviously, if you didn't have it, it'd have been very hard to get to that level.
Yeah, and to me, the problem solving component and the technology component and the business strategy is just such an area of enjoyment for me to be able to kind of cobble together a plan or a strategy or a roadmap. I used to love people that would come into an organization, and I may have been a longstanding CIO there, and they'd say, "So what's your IT strategy?" I go, "Well, we're going to have a conversation about the business strategy first," and you just peel that onion back, and it really is. And we said it earlier, transparent. If you don't have a passion for what you're doing, it is obvious, painfully obvious. I used to use this term with my team all the time. You know how you're walking past each other in the hall or whatever. Hey, how you doing? And if they said getting by, we would meet, right? So I'd be like, people look at you, and
Oh, yeah.
if the best you can be is getting by, how do you think they feel, right? Your team is looking at you for inspiration, for guidance, and if they see that passion, it's contagious. But if you say getting by, you have set the bar so low for them that we all have our hard days, we all have hard challenges, it's about what do you do as a leader to deal with that, and to me that passion and that focusing on the positive of what we're trying to accomplish can empower people to achieve incredible things.
For sure. For sure. It reminds me of we had a call a few days ago, and I remember I was telling a story where a mutual friend that Rob and I have, his name's Ross Parr. I was telling him, I said, man, I called so and so. I said, I think he was having a bad day. He goes, did you ask him? I'm like, no, I'm not going to ask if he's having a bad day. He goes, next time somebody you think is having a bad day, ask him. And I'm like, oh, okay. Not even a week later, I call another guy, and I could tell he was mad about something. And I'm trying to, have a conversation. I said, hey, Brian, I said, are you having a bad day? And he's like, you know what, Nate, I am. This is what's going on. My kid's doing this and blah, blah, blah. And for like 5 minutes, he just talked. And then he goes, you know what? What did you call about? Okay, thanks for listening. What did you call about? And then it was like, whoosh, it was total shift in his mindset, which, sometimes you're better off just being brutally, I shouldn't say brutally honest. That's not the right word, but just call a spade and say, hey, is everything okay?
It's disarming, right? It really just, it lowers the temperature, it disarms them, and all of a sudden they're confronted by what's their reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I love that technique because I think if you can master that, it comes across as being just a concerned friend, not
Yep.
something else.
Well, and from a listening perspective, think about it from the other person's point of view. If I've got a million things on my mind and I'm worried about this and I'm worried about that, I'm not listening to you. I don't care what you're saying, but I'm not hearing it.
That's right. That's right. You're not being productive no matter what. So you can either end the call or I love are you having a bad day? And I think some of those things are incredibly powerful. Somebody taught me, with some of my outreach, some of my email outreach, if you don't get a response after the second and third, everybody has a technique, but have I lost you? Right? It's a very personal kind of question, and you get a significant response. It might be no, but at least you know there's a pulse at the other end of the computer. So I think those things are incredibly important. One of the things that I used to describe myself as being candid, and people quickly corrected me and said, "No, you're brutally honest." And again, that's one of the things that I would soften a little bit, probably from the early days of my career. But I also think, being candid is so efficient, right?
Yep.
And if you're driving towards something, you want that candor. And I tell people all the time, I can't lie to you and I can't, blow smoke because I'm not smart enough to remember what I told you, and I'll screw it up down the road if I don't, achieve the brutal honesty or whatever. But I think all those things just, build character. And I love are you having a bad day? Because you made it a personal relationship then. You made it about them, and you had maybe an alternative motive to get to the point you were trying to get to, but it never comes across that way because it's not intended.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It's all humans talking to humans, right? And it's hard to sometimes think of that or remember that because you're kind of going through the motions and, doing your thing or whatever. But the more you acknowledge from a human standpoint, I just think the better off everything is, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So Dion, thank you so much for taking time. I know you have a lot going on and we really appreciate you making time for this. Great discussion. I had fun. I'm sure Rob did as well. And
Definitely.
it's great to hear your perspective because not only on the client side, but also on the sales side. So that was very interesting because the commonalities between the two, there's a lot of commonalities, right? And you saw and you knew you were that guy sometimes who maybe not be so nice to somebody, which part of life, right? Sometimes you have a bad day, but really appreciate you making time and thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation.
For sure.
That concludes another episode of Sales Stories with Nate Teske. I'm your co-host, Rob Sullivan. Definitely tuned in. We're going to have more guests, more great conversations, more insights, things that'll help you really no matter where you are in your career. So hit that like button, subscribe. It's all free. Stay tuned in and, comment. If there's a question you want to ask or if you've got an insight, maybe something we missed or didn't cover, by all means, we love the dialogue. We'll respond. Definitely stay engaged and tune in next time. Thank you.
Thank you.